if you ask anyone about their HSA or their FSA account, the emotions, the sentiment that usually come up are frustration, fear, confusion. And ultimately, these accounts are meant to help consumers save money and be able to invest or spend it on their health. Historically, you're absolutely right. Like, it's just been really hard to use these accounts. You can use them at places like the doctor's office or the hospital, but they really weren't designed for a world where so much of healthcare, very impactful healthcare, is taking place outside of the traditional healthcare institutions, right? It's in your home, it's what you're how you're moving, what you're eating, the data that's being collected on your wrist. Like that is much more what consumers are thinking about as health, and they're really taking ownership for that.
Welcome back to the Fitt Insider Podcast. I'm your host, Joe Veneri. Today I'm joined by Sam O'Keefe, co-founder and CEO of Flex. In this episode, we discuss unlocking consumer health spending by making HSA and FSA payments seamless at checkout. Sam shares how Flex helps wellness brands accept tax-advantaged dollars, why the system is so confusing, and how this shift can make preventative health spending more accessible. Plus, we talk about the impact for merchants, from higher conversion to bigger carts, and what it will take to make pay with HSA FSA as common as PayPal. Let's get into it. The Fitt Insider Podcast is presented by EGYM. EGYM's smart fitness ecosystem is transforming healthcare through exercise. Combining strength equipment with AI-powered software and corporate wellness platform WellPass, it's leading the shift to proactive preventative health. Learn more about EGYM's intelligent workout solutions at egym.com. Hi, Sam. Welcome to Fitt Insider. Thanks for joining us.
Hey, Joe. Thanks so much for having me.
Yeah, looking forward to the conversation. To kick things off, why don't you just introduce yourself, tell us about Flex, and then we will get into it.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm Sam. I'm one of the co-founders and CEO here at Flex. And our mission at Flex is to improve health by making consumer directed spend simple, seamless, and ubiquitous. So what we've built, we're an enterprise ready payments platform, and we enable health and wellness brands to accept HSA and FSA funds seamlessly at checkout. So we work across the wellness space, fitness, sleep recovery, supplements, wearables, sensors. We really run the gamut and are excited to connect with more folks in the space.
Yeah, for sure. It's kind of much needed and it almost counterintuitive in the sense that like those funds are locked up and not able to be used seamlessly for all the things that we're talking about. Why is that maybe? And then like how does Flex change that to make it so it's like we can put these funds towards things that actually make us healthy and it can improve our lifestyle and things like that.
Yeah, absolutely. And this gets at the core of why I'm so excited about what we're working on. As a consumer, if you ask anyone about their HSA or their FSA account, the emotions, the sentiment that usually come up are frustration, fear, confusion. And ultimately, these accounts are meant to help consumers save money and be able to invest or spend it on their health. And so historically, you're absolutely right. Like, it's just been really hard to use these accounts. You can use them at places like the doctor's office or the hospital, but they really weren't designed for a world where so much of healthcare and so much of like very, preventative and in my opinion, very impactful healthcare is taking place outside of the traditional healthcare institutions, right? It's in your home, it's what you're how you're moving, what you're eating, the data that's being collected on your wrist. Like that is much more what consumers are thinking about as health, and they're really taking ownership for that. And so, what Flex does, our approach is we want you to be able to use these funds the same way you would use any other payment method. So we partner with retailers and merchants to add HSA and FSA as a payment method directly at checkout. The same way you might see PayPal or a buy now, pay later option, you're going to see Flex pay with HSA FSA. And then from there, we take care of all of the compliance and regulatory requirements that's going to be required to get those debit cards, which you actually get with your accounts today, get those cards to swipe. And there's a couple of different ways that we do that we can go into, but at a very high level, that's been our approach and ultimately wanting to solve that consumer pain point and frustration in the simplest way possible.
I don't have kind of HSA, FSA accounts personally. So maybe this is obvious, but just in terms of like researching this as it relates to the market and then kind of seeing how others, family members, et cetera, experience it, seems to be like there's this mad dash that like you have X amount of dollars in your account and you have to spend it before before it disappears or you don't have any more. In terms of when we'll talk about like the compliance and things like that and why Flex makes it easy, but why are there so many barriers to using those dollars if they are intended to have this kind of outcome and ultimately like needing a solution like Flex in the market?
Yeah, what I always come back to is these accounts are regulated by the IRS, which I think comes as a shock to a lot of people because, they're it's literally called a health savings account. So why is the tax branch of government involved here? Well, these are tax advantaged accounts, right? You can contribute to them as a consumer pre-tax. And so when you take a step back and you say, why is it so hard for me to buy this healthy stuff? Well, you have tax law really governing what defines health, right? The IRS actually has a whole section of the code, 213D, that defines what is a medical expense. So I think when you start from that lens and realize, like, where is all this coming from? Some of the mechanics that we experience and frustrations, I'll say, that we experience as consumers downstream start to make a little bit more sense. And so, a lot of the friction and what you're referring to is the kind of classic use it or lose it dynamic with FSA accounts, in the sense that for most accounts on December 31st, any funds that you've contributed that haven't been spent, right, they go back to your employer. And that's where a lot of that fear around them comes from. Am I going to be able to spend it? Am I going to just end up buying a year's worth of contact lenses or sunscreen, which are, all the texts when I was starting this business that I would get in the first few months from my friends say, hey, this actually is a problem. I just bought $1,000 worth of sunscreen. And so that's really where, a lot of that frustration comes from. The IRS is trying to be judicious and make sure that the funds are spent on appropriate medical expenses, right? They're trying to do their diligence. But in doing so, the processes and just the requirements that have been set up downstream for consumers just introduce a lot of confusion and friction in the buying process. And that was a key insight kind of in starting the business was these accounts can actually be used for a lot more things and a lot more places than people realize. There's an education problem. And then there's just this kind of friction in the system because of the complexity of what's required. And so, myself and my co founder, we come from engineering backgrounds, we're product people. This looked like something that could be solved by putting all that complexity, into a product and really streamlining that consumer experience. So that's kind of how we've approached it.
Yeah, it's super helpful context and even kind of like from the regulatory and IRS side, which then makes all the things that you're doing in terms of compliance, eligibility, medical necessity, like clearance, super integral to the process of unlocking those funds for merchants. You mentioned this kind of obviously there's an education piece too with consumers, but for merchants in terms of what you're able to do, how the platform works, how much kind of education, pitching, sell, like really getting to understand, like, hey, this not only this is the amount of funding that's available and could be used, but this is really how it's turnkey and we can implement it in a way that's, not only beneficial to the consumer, but obviously the dollars that are available.
Yeah, absolutely. So when we work with merchants, we're solving a pain for consumers, but in doing so, we really, are adding value to merchants. And, now having been around working with hundreds of merchants, we have really reliable data on adding HSA and FSA to your checkout. It can be, a nice thing to do for your consumers. Hey, you're giving them more options, but ultimately it's a revenue driver for your business, right? We see attracting net new users, we see checkout page conversion. I was talking to a customer recently, checkout page conversion up 30%, right? Adding HSA, FSA. Average order value, or that cart size that people are checking out with, can more than double for certain industries by adding this payment method. Return volume goes down. People are less likely to return when they buy with these payment methods. So when we talk to a merchant, we're coming in and saying, "Hey, let's be a great partner to your this is a business proposition, right? This is revenue generating. And oh, by the way, it's also a great way to align your brand with health if that's part of your mission. It's a great way to maybe make a premium product a little bit more accessible, right? Because these funds are tax advantage. Consumers on average save about 30%. So you can broaden maybe the consumers that might consider that purchase without having to offer a discount or a sale, right? And you can protect that premium brand. So there's a couple of different, value props or levers that the merchant lenses, I should say, that the merchant can look at this with. But ultimately, it's a great investment for their business, and their consumers end up being very happy to have this option.
There's always this kind of, hey, the business proposition is there. It makes sense. We can do it. It's turnkey. It has the benefits. And just as a business operator myself, like sometimes that is not always the case. You end up, kind of getting bogged down. You have to change the way this tech stack operating this way. This is doing this. It doesn't desired results from maybe the implementation to just like the checkout experience. I guess how did you arrive at Flex's particular solution, and like what type of, if you want to think of it like reassurance or implementation that you can point to be like, hey, yeah, like we have a good handle on doing this, doing it at scale, doing it for a variety of different clients kind of across and merchants across the space.
Yeah, absolutely. So, when Flex started, and I really came at this from, I'm a consumer, I have this frustration. I want to invest in exercise. For me was the big category. Having been an athlete my whole life, how do I make this accessible? Working with my co-founder Miguel, we had been building fraud products before this. So kind of, in the fintech space, when we started working together, he very clearly saw this, as a payments kind of alternative payments company, saw where it was headed, and really had the insight to make us an API first company. So that is how we started. We wanted to be able to service any type of tech stack, any configuration from the onset. And that's our philosophy when we build. Everything goes into the API first. And then, of course, to make it easier, we build into and we integrate with different e-commerce platforms. So, of course, we work with Shopify, we work with WooCommerce, we work with Shopline, and we're adding a bunch of, e-commerce platforms or other types of partners like Revenue Cat all the time. But at our core, we're API first. So as you invest in the product, and in particular as you go up market, right? When we talk to larger brands, they do a lot of custom stuff, right? They're not using kind of an out of the box configuration, and that's where being such a API first company, I think, has really served us well to be able to go to a partner. And sometimes they'll say, how does this work? How does this plug in? And we say, how would you like it to work? Because our system is extremely flexible, extremely robust. And ultimately, we want to enable the merchants to, they know their business best. They're experimenting all the time with checkout pages are precious. Like that's very protected real estate. And so if they've put years and run all these tests into this is how it needs to work, and this is our product bundling, and this is the sequencing of how it goes, we don't want to go in there and force them to change that. They should be able to we should be able to adapt to their system and also allow them to continue to iterate on that as it goes. So I think we've had a lot of success with that. Also, as you go with scale, we have to look at eligibility across the entire product offering. So when I look at a partner of ours like a derm store, they've got a few different categories of eligibility, many thousands of products, and that inventory list is dynamic and changing all the time. So in order to keep them and their customers compliant, which is, a big value prop of Flex, we take that very seriously. We have to have the infrastructure to monitor those inventory changes, assign eligibility, make sure the checkout the consumer is experiencing meets the requirements of the IRS, and then ultimately has great authorization rates. And all of that works with the tech stack that they are bringing to the table already. So that's just like, not to get too in the weeds, just a little teaser as to some of the types of things we think about all the time.
Yeah, it's really interesting because you're talking about order volume and size and return and increase in sales. It's like you have that visibility into how that's applying across different companies, sectors, fitness, recovery, skincare, sleep. Like, do you have a sense of this is the far and away like kind of the breakout kind of category or product, or this is working as it relates to not only improving sales for the client, but like compliance and eligibility, and then being able to onboard those types of merchants or scale within that category?
Yeah, I mean, the really exciting thing is that we see positive momentum kind of across all of the areas of wellness, to be honest. I think the main, differences I see are in, maybe the buying patterns of the demographics that happen to go to those merchants and how HSA or FSA might influence those buying patterns. So if you're buying Ladder, which is, a strength training app, how is HSA or FSA going to incentivize you, how long you're going to subscribe, or if you're going to get started? That persona may be a little bit different than someone who's maybe buying, menopause supplements. And so that's a little bit more what we see. I think in general, there's lift across category, which is very exciting. But I will call out something that's just been really interesting for me personally is that what we observe is that healthcare spending for families tends to be directed by women. And so when we look at the spending patterns of people in our, network who are using HSA, FSA, it does skew more female and it skews kind of in like first purchases in that like 35 to 44 demographic. A lot of them are making, starting families, making health decisions for the families, and then seeing repeat purchases across other categories from there. So I think that is something kind of interesting. And what I've seen in wellness as a whole is that, women's health is now becoming health, right? You see wearables companies really honing in on that demographic. I see, fitness brands really honing in on that demographic because they realize if they can get that persona, they bring the whole family with them. And so it's just kind of an interesting observation we've seen working with our merchants over time.
This episode of the Fitt Insider Podcast is brought to you by EGYM. EGYM makes some of the most innovative strength training machines on the market, but that's only one part of their integrated ecosystem. With connected fitness equipment, AI-powered gym software, and a comprehensive corporate wellness offering, it's forging the future of preventative health. Partnering with companies worldwide, EGYM's WellPass program improves employee health by expanding access to premier fitness and health facilities. Upgrading gym floors, EGYM equips every operator with smart equipment and AI tools to create hyper-personalized training plans for every exerciser. Putting it all together, they're transforming healthcare through exercise. Experience the power of EGYM's ecosystem at egym.com. Can you maybe say more about the subscription aspect where you're talking about whether it's ladder or other strength training or wellness products? Are there insights maybe similar to what you're talking about with like the women's health aspect? How does something like Flex factor into that retention and usage, and maybe is what's even like the psychology or like the rationale behind how it does improve that or factor in?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we definitely see checkout conversion improvement, and I think for subscriptions in particular, they're looking at that lifetime value. That's a really key metric for them. And across the board, we see subscriptions. If the subscription's on an HSA or FSA account, you're seeing an 8 to 10% extension of that purchase. And, I'm not like a psychologist or anything, but like, my hypothesis and when I talk to consumers that have checked out with us, the thinking is, hey, this is kind of a separate pool of funds, right? This is a separate from my day-to-day spending. And I've already set it aside to invest in something in my health, and this is kind of what where I'm choosing to put those funds. And so it's something that they've maybe pre-planned or they feel like they have a little bit more ability to spend. And I think that's reflective, in the longer subscriptions. But then, I mentioned average order value. Why are the orders so much bigger? It's because they might reach for that more premium offering that maybe they wouldn't have bought with their regular funds. Maybe they'll buy a couple of items, right? They'll try that new product. We see this a lot in the skincare space, right? They're going to try that more premium, whether it's a red light mask or acne treatment, than they maybe would have otherwise if they didn't have this option.
There's another area that I don't know, I guess historically, when you think about like e-commerce and online purchases and things like that, the checkout flow, and it definitely makes a ton of sense and really kind of factors in even when you're talking about like subscriptions and lifetime volume or value and all those things. Now starting to kind of shift how maybe gym and studio operators, brick and mortar fitness brands are thinking about HSA, FSA. I guess what kind of traction success have you seen there? And then even treating this something as, it's not just kind of a perk, nice to have, but really like a growth lever for them in terms of reaching a new demographic. And then you get into retention and usage and all those sorts of things that come along with it.
Yeah, absolutely. So, as I said, I kind of got into this business for making fitness and movement more accessible. That was our very first partner was actually my local CrossFit gym here in San Francisco, and we haven't talked about it, but of course how fitness qualifies is through the letter of medical necessity, which is essentially a doctor's note that says exercise. You qualify for exercise. It's a medical expense because you're either managing, treating, preventing some type of condition, which everyone's got something, and exercise has been shown to be beneficial just across the board. So, anyway, starting there, early on, we saw a lot of the direct to consumer, equipment or apps being really interested in the space. Then came the studios, and that's we probably work with a couple of hundred of studios today, just being a facilitator. We enable consumers to come to us and have that telehealth appointment for a letter of medical necessity, right? But they're still paying out of pocket, they're paying with their own funds. They get that letter, they have to file for reimbursement. That's kind of been the state of studio experiences with HSA FSA to date. I'm really excited to share that we actually have a very large partner that's approaching this differently, and that partner is Equinox. Equinox, I think, is a brand everyone's familiar with, very luxury, very premium consumer experience. When they looked at this space, they didn't want to introduce that friction to their consumers. They said that doesn't align with our brand. That's not the experience we want them to have. And we don't believe that's going to ultimately drive the impact to our business. And so we were fortunate to partner with them and actually integrate into their checkout experience, into their payments. And so their new members are able to sign up through Flex with their HSA or FSA card directly, right in Equinox's checkout flow, and put that subscription or that personal training experience, on that account right away, which is, I think, really forward looking and something we're very excited to work with them on.
Yeah, that's massive. And well, props to you all for that partnership, but also, as you mentioned, them and kind of taking this different approach and really the ease of use of for the member to be able to implement that, whether it's with the kind of fitness partners that you already work with somebody like Equinox. Do you kind of see this moving in the direction of like this being, I don't want to say the status quo, but just more common in that treating, managing, preventing, it's like, yeah, all the above, like is what I'm trying to do when I think about exercise. And as we see this shift more from maybe performance or aesthetics or PRs to longevity and aging well and strength training to prevent fall risks and movement for mental health, as those lines blur, you kind of sit in the middle of that. How much is that kind of contributing and fueling these conversations with maybe other fitness brands?
Yeah. Oh, I think it's a great call out. The conversation around fitness in particular has completely changed from you think of 20 years ago, that dynamic was you want to look a certain way, you want to be a certain weight, right? And you almost never, extremely rarely hear that type of language now for the better. Like I think people are really looking at fitness as an investment in health, physical health. And I really appreciate that you called out mental health because, study after study is now showing that fitness in concert with, more traditional SSRIs or even fitness independently can have a massive impact on certain kind of mental health conditions, and I'm a huge proponent of that as a factor of treatment, and so I do think you're seeing this shift in fitness. Flex is a kind of a part of that, being able to not only align, your branding with health, but actually put kind of your actions behind that and say, "We're actually accepting health-related dollars for our services, and we think these things tie together." So, to your question, like, will this continue? I go back to our mission statement, like, we want Flex and HSA, FSA to be ubiquitous, right, in every checkout. So, yes, our vision is that every studio fitness has this at some point. This is a very exciting first step, and I'd say a big step given the brand that we're partnering with and the visibility that it will have to consumers, but that's where, I would love the industry to get to.
In sharing with the audience, and even what came to my mind today is, thinking about how you're talking about the shift in where Flex fits in and how you enable this kind of unlock of these dollars, right? There's the obvious, okay, fitness, but wellness and recovery and preventative health and healthcare and all those things that are blurring together. Point being, rolling up hardware, at least the pitch, hardware, software, marketplace, corporate wellness, that having a whole bunch of different moving parts. And then, someone like yourself, fintech, wellness, preventative care, healthcare, like, do you put yourself, which bucket do you put yourself in? How do you think about that? Not only in my mind, again, kind of operators like, okay, who are the likely acquirers? Where do the partnerships come from? What do the integrations look like? And that can go a whole bunch of different ways, which is awesome. But how do you think about it? Kind of like, to what extent does it matter so long as like you're doing your job? I'm sure as like CEO hat, it's like if we execute our plan and our roadmap, like put us in whatever bucket that makes sense for you, but like we're gonna do our thing. Like, yeah, how do you think about that now? How has that evolved, kind of since building the company?
Yeah, I mean, I think from the beginning, I've kind of said, like, my mission is health and my business is fintech. And that has allowed us to be really focused, I think, from a product perspective on what it is we're building and where we see ourselves, how we work with merchants, where we sit in that stack. But at the end of the day, what gets us up in the morning, right, is if we're successful, that means consumers can spend their funds how and where they think it will be most impactful to their health. And, you know, if this continues, these HSA and FSA accounts are really underutilized. We talk about today $150 billion dollars in them. More often than not, they're underfunded, and lots of people who could open them don't because of those emotions we talked about. If you start seeing this at every checkout, if you know someone that paid for their gym with an HSA or FSA, you're going to start hearing that fear goes away. More people open the accounts, they contribute more, they save more, and spending on health is top of mind. So, like, I'd say we don't fit cleanly into one bucket, and I think that to answer your question, and I think that works for us. And I think, as you noted, these lines are blurring in a lot of different ways. So we're just a part of that.
To your point there, as you're talking about, you know, the amount of money that it's already there, that they're underfunded, that people aren't utilizing it. As you continue to build this network, both on supply and demand, how much do you see being able to help with discovery, customer acquisition, cross promotion, upsells among, consumer base and the dollars that are already sitting there? I guess, how much are you doing that now? What role does that kind of factor in long term?
Yeah, I would say it's a growing part of what we do. Early on, we were really focused on our merchants and that B2B, experience and onboarding them. And as we've grown and we have more and more consumers who have checked out with Flex or more and more merchants saying, "Hey, can you help this ecosystem of buyers discover us?" we've been investing more in the consumer side of our business. So we recently kind of redid our marketplace to, showcase our partners. So that's with flex.com/shop. We have been investing in a social presence, in email, all the things you might expect with the real and it really came from the merchant saying, can you help these consumers find us? And then consumers also, maybe they've checked out with us once, they're reaching out to our support saying, hey, where else can I use this? Like, this was cool. Or, hey, I noticed you're not on this page. Can you go reach out to this merchant? So it was really kind of organic from the ecosystem. But yeah, consumer is an area we're continuing to invest.
Just when we're recording this, it's still kind of pretty early in the year, mid January, a lot of end of year planning, new year planning. You raised some money last year. Like, so everything, the momentum, what's top? You have the Equinox announcement. What's top of mind for you, for the team, whether it's KPIs or just things that you're excited about or focusing in on as, you get off to a strong start in the new year and continuing to push that momentum.
I think it's gonna be a great year. We're really excited. It's January is always a big time in wellness, so it's kind of fun to see. But looking forward to the rest of the year, in order to achieve our mission and make this easy for all consumers, we are looking to work with larger and larger kind of merchant and brand partners that have that audience. So we can introduce them to HSA, FSA, and then bring them, into our ecosystem of brands and things like that. And so that's, what we're really spending our time on and excited to build for.
For folks who are listening, maybe they are those partners or maybe they're you consumers, whatever their interest may be, what's the best way to continue to follow along, learn more, and maybe start that process on both sides of like this education and maybe onboarding?
Yeah, absolutely. So our website, withflex.com, you can reach out to us there. I'm just Sam at withflex.com. So feel free to email me questions about how to get started or anything like that. I'd love feedback. I'd love to hear from you if you're a consumer that checked out with us or if you're a merchant that wants to explore this space. And then of course we're across all the social platforms. So LinkedIn, Instagram, Twitter, you can find us there. Follow along.
We'll make it easy to find. We'll get everything kind of linked up in the show notes with this episode. And yeah, encourage folks to reach out. It was a great chatting today. So super excited we were able to make it happen. And thanks for making time.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Joe.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. If you got value from the conversation, please consider subscribing and sharing the podcast with a friend or colleague. It's a massive help. And if you want more content like this, including news and insights on the latest industry developments, subscribe to the Fitt Insider newsletter at insider.fit.co. And one more thing, you can learn more about our recruiting and consulting services at fit.co. That's FITT.co. I'll see you here next week.